otherwise we'll run massively over. So I will hand over to Conor talking about deceptive defences, leveraging honeypots in OT environments. Over to you, mate.
Cheers. Hi everyone, I'm Conor. I currently work as a threat detection engineer. I'm CrowdStrike, but what this presentation comes across is it's all my experience in my prior jobs. Sorry, just give me 1 second here. So nothing discussed today relates to sort of my current work. My prior jobs, I spent about 7 years working in mining, water, energy, transportation. So that's both sort of rail, port facilities, that type of stuff. I have my certifications there. You know, I've done the GISP, the grid, so there's a couple of SAN certs. If you guys are interested in looking at OT security, I highly recommend them. I'm also a member of Professionals Australia. I know there's a couple of other members here as well. It's a union for IT workers. We do have a union with all the layoffs and reduction in forces at various tech companies. If you're concerned about that or anything else, come chat to me later. So why deceptive defenses? This really comes out from participating in a number of risk assessments and things like that, where I'm sitting at the table across from some engineer, some cybersecurity expert from a client system or something like that, and you can propose honeypots as a potential control to help somewhat offset some risk of something. And quite often, you know, these controls will get rejected and things like that, and I'm just sitting there looking at the person across the table from me, and I'm just like, you just think this is too hard, and you don't know what to do. So what I hope to get across here is in a lot of these legacy systems, your SIEM, your NIDs, your endpoint defenses might not be appropriate because of the legacy environments you're putting them into, or they're deemed too sort of high risk to touch anything on the endpoint systems. So what I hope is that by the end of what we're doing here, you guys will be able to go to work tomorrow and hopefully able to play with this and potentially set something up in about an hour, right? It's not a scary prospect. It's only how you architect it and how you position it and how you set it up, which is really what you have to worry about. So what we're going across here, just to touch a brief history on honeypots. I'll go through the purpose types, use cases. I will give you some practical examples of where I have used this in the field. I'll talk about the global use for people who work for large companies who have a large distributed systems. Potentially, I'll show you how. We'll see if my VPN plays nice with actually being able to show you a live instance. So honeypots, old intelligence gathering tool. You know, Sir Francis Walsingham, which was like Elizabeth I spy master, you know, set up fake channels to deliver or collect information for some people involved in plots against her. You can find talk of people utilizing things similar to honeypots in a lot of intelligence uses or espionage uses throughout history. You know, one of the more common scenarios, if we're thinking about cybersecurity, is The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll, which is what I would say is recommended reading for anyone in cybersecurity, just because it's a really great story to start with, but it also provides a really awesome technical insight into a lot of the foundational concepts which we still base our career on. So Stoll was a physicist on loan to his university's IT department, and they had an accounting error on because they had to pay for CPU time back then between different departments. And so after a long investigation, he identified a hacker coming in from Germany and utilizing their servers to try and break into US defense institutions and stuff like that. It was a long process to track the hacker. So the hacker was coming in from the University of Bremen and would go through the German Datex, which was the German post office, essentially. It managed all the internet in Germany at the time. Went through Timnet International, which was sort of a switching service between international carriers. The problem was you had to keep the hacker on the line, so on the phone line literally, long enough for someone in the German post office to trace the cables to work out where he's coming from. So to do that, they created a honeypot with fake defense grants and documents and things like that to hopefully be able to keep this hacker on the line to work out exactly where he is. So like Sir Francis's traps for Catholic spies in the Elizabethan era, Stoll's honeypot gave false info to the attacker. This deception prevented the attacker from strolling elsewhere through the network. Because of this, the honeypot, because of the honeypot, the attacker was able to be tracked and then ultimately stopped. So while it's unlikely in modern era, now we would be able to, physically track and arrest the hackers that we see in our systems, we can still deceive them, and then by deceiving them, we're preventing them from potentially attacking assets that we do care about. And deceive them and hold them up long enough internally for us to be able to track what they're doing, where they're coming from, and ultimately this all comes into a consideration which is called active defense. So moving on, having a look at the purposes here. So this is probably a common conception of what people think about honeypot. I mean, you've got the Norse attack map, which was great when I started in cybersecurity, because if an executive walks in, you could just throw this up and it's like, oh, look, we're doing something. But this is the typical of what you see for honeypots: external systems providing lots and lots of information, but not really that much utility. And that comes down to, hey, you're collecting raw data, and raw data isn't necessarily intelligence until you actually analyze it. An IP address isn't intelligence until you start doing something, until you start applying context to it. So this presentation won't really be going into looking at intelligence or developing intelligence. There are a lot of utilities online that you can explore if this is something you're interested in. Honeypot traffic. So the deception of the honeypots, which is what we are focusing on here, is convincing attackers your honeypot is a legit, valid target. If you're thinking about the Swiss cheese model, that everyone's familiar with, a whole bunch of holes, and eventually someone's going to find a hole that lines up all the way through. They might already be in the network somewhere else and trying to find another hole. We want to be able to provide them with that hole and focus their attention and focus their time on that, so that they're wasted and we start getting alerts into saying, hey, someone's trying to check something out internally. We're collecting this information, we're acting on it as part of our active defense. So this is the DRKW hierarchy. Are we familiar with the first instinct fallacy? So the first time you come to a conclusion about something you're seeing, it's really hard to be able to shift yourself mentally off your original conclusion. A lot of the data, a lot of the patterns and things like that you start seeing, unless you go into some sort of structured analytical technique where you're breaking out the data that you're seeing and thinking about it in different ways and thinking about it with different conclusions in mind, you'll tend to start patterning everything into your first instinct. What we want to do with our honeypots as a deception tool is start interfering with this DRKW hierarchy. So the DRKW hierarchy, we want to be able to promote bad data from which the wrong context will be derived, which means they have now bad information about what's happening inside our network. They can apply the wrong knowledge that they have to that information, and then their insight is correct. Apply their insight to it, i.e. their own TTPs, and generate sort of bad wisdom from what they're doing. And through this method of us being able to create and craft tools internally in our network, which they're going to waste their time on, we now get an insight into what they're doing. So, Honeypots active defense. This is a term that I keep coming back to. So, we want to have these tools to be able to provide us with potential early threat detection. So, the traditional form of honeypots that I was talking about, where you get your cool Norse map and that type of stuff, that's sitting at the information stage, all the way on the far left of the active defense life cycle. We want to be able to put this into active defense, where it's like we're actually doing something about it. We can, we're gathering information on the TTPs, and we're strengthening security controls actively. Now I'll touch on types, just to make sure that we're on the same page about what honeypots are and what they do. So firstly, low interaction. These are quick, these are lightweight. A lot of these tools you can find on GitHub. They simulate limited services, so you'll have something like just an SSH endpoint or an open FTP server, something like that, where they log interactions with minimal sort of resources applied to them. They're really nice to be able to chuck on a Raspberry Pi and throw somewhere and connect it up, and that's all you have to do. A couple of examples, Dioneer, Cowrie, you can find these tools online. High interaction ones. These ones are tools that do require analysis applied to them. So if you find yourself short on manpower resources, potentially leveraging low interaction honeypots is what you're trying to do in your teams. Or if you do have the resources and potentially do have an intelligence function that you can rely on within your cybersecurity team structure, then this might be a better solution. You have things like Lyrebird, which will have a vulnerable web application, intentionally vulnerable web application, but you're man in the middle of all the traffic just to see what people are going on. From these, you can generate more in-depth understanding of an attacker's TTPs. Of course, you do have canaries. They're really simple, really easy to do. You can do these yourselves if you're going to shove it into Active Directory, or you can do your own DNS logging, that type of stuff. Things does their canary tokens, but it's easy enough to set it up yourself. So I'll just call out here as a potential tool you could utilize. Oops, yep, things. So our deployment considerations and risks. So each different type has its own risks associated with it. So if you are deploying it to OT network, you're going to have to consider this when you're planning out your architecture and planning out your controls. High interaction honeypots can essentially be considered full systems. If we think back to the example I had at the very start with Clifford Stoll and what he was doing to try and track down that German hacker, that had a full system of data of grant information and emails and stuff like that, which he put in place to be able to deceive his hacker. So it takes a lot of work and takes a lot of time to set that up. You want to be able to make sure that these systems that are potentially full interactable systems are properly isolated, from parts of the network where it could be someone is able to break through or break out of the honeypot that you've had into some other part of your network, and you don't want that to affect your critical control systems that you're concerned about. With alerting, this can be very difficult if you don't manage your alerting strategy very well. At the very end, I'll be showing a tool which I've utilized, which really simplifies collecting logs from a whole bunch of different honeypots into one centralized location. So, you want to figure out how you can, if you aren't utilizing a SIEM product because you don't have one deployed to your OT environment, do you have some other aggregation method that you're utilizing, some other way to get alerts, get information out of these honeypots? this really should be considered as a whole of operations approach. This isn't so much a detection engineering talk, but Palantir's alerting detection strategies is probably a good place to start if you want to start conceiving how you're going to like map out these alerts. And finally, maintenance. Honeypots, especially for external systems, will require upgrades to defeat mass scanners if you are hunting for information, if you are hunting for intelligence. Internal, maybe not so much, but this is still a risk to consider. These are live systems. You do have to maintain them the same as anything else. Here is an example from Carry, which is a honeypot. This is a GitHub issue from 2021. Essentially, a botnet figured out, hey, we're getting trapped in Carry. Let's set up a bunch of controls to see, bunch of commands to see, is this a honeypot system that I'm connecting to, and then not complete the last stage of its attack, which is what this honeypot was designed for, to collect the malware that's dropped. Very briefly, a table to sort of understand the purposes, the goals that you're trying to achieve. So utilize the tool that's appropriate for the job that you're trying to do. All right, touch on use cases. There's quite a few different places where you can deploy honeypot systems. Firstly, the very obvious one, detecting, sort of scanning, reconnaissance, that type of stuff. You can sit this between your IT and your OT environments. If you do have that sort of level 3.5 DMZ, where you do have access through for one from the other. I don't know why those boxes are white. That's annoying. Blue, you have your IACS environment. Red, you have your IT environment, and your honeypot in the center. So sorry about that. I don't know why that converted to white. My bad. Monitoring untrusted vendors. So you're having someone like Siemens, someone like Schneider or whatever coming in, remotely accessing your OT network. And so you have all your potentially untrusted bad actors over here, and they're accessing a jump host in the center. Those accounts could be compromised by someone. And you want to set up your honeypot system to be able to say, if someone accesses my jump host and they don't know where they're going at the end of the day, how can I make sure that I collect someone who is engaging in reconnaissance activity? So this is a good place to be able to put a honeypot that sits offside of your ISCS network and collecting potential traffic, potential reconnaissance after someone's already compromised a third-party account. Dev test zones, if you're going to be able to replicating your OT environment into a development zone, this is often doesn't have quite as stringent controls, might not have as strict security, or it might not be collecting all the logs from it, but it could be something where some third-party integrator comes in and has access to be able to set up this in your dev environment, in your UAT environment before you push it out into the production systems. Again, this is where you would want to set a honeypot to say, is someone looking for systems which shouldn't be there, is just doing generalized reconnaissance, and you want to try and catch them at that point. Finally, legacy systems. I'm sure, this being WA, there's some people here working in mining, oil and gas. You have a conveyor weighing system which is maintained by some guy who works out of a shed in Dongara or something like that. There's all sorts of weird legacy tech which lives in these environments. I mean, as sort of one example here, I went into a risk assessment activity, and you're looking at, it was for freezing works, and it was a system that maintains, the conveyor speed depending on the weight of the cattle or the lamb coming in through the slaughterhouse. And I was looking at it on a Windows 2003 server, cool. But all the sensors and stuff were communicating through something I didn't understand. I said, what is this communicating on? This is Dave's protocol. who's Dave? He worked here about 15 years ago. He's retired now, and helps us when we need help. So okay, cool. I have a bunch of questions. Where can I ask him? He's like, oh, we'll put it on the list. He sometimes the nurse helps him remote in on TeamViewer because we get him to help him out when he has a good day because he has dementia. So there's all sorts of weird stuff that exists like that, which you don't realize is controlling some of these systems. So a couple of practical examples. Railway lateral movement. So I just need to be clear here, we have one passenger railway provider here in WA. I'm not talking about them. This is somewhere else. Love you, PTA. Thank you. My boxes are white again, fuck's sake. So this is a new train station for passenger rail expansion. The systems were commissioned sort of with minimal cybersecurity requirements at the start. The station BMCS, which is a building management control system, which handles all the lighting and the aircon and the vertical transportation systems, elevator, escalator, that type of stuff, was connected had a HMI server system, which is this box here. Great. The vulnerability that we found is that post-commissioning for this station, there was a main switchboard, so that the power control switchboards actually had a little web server hanging off them, which is where they would facilitate shipping CSV files and things like that, which would be accepted by the BMCS HMI, which is how they built all their pretty graphs and stuff like that, which people would utilize. This main control board, which is this server thing here, sorry for my labels again, actually had access into line-wide PCS, which is the power control system, which controlled all the power for all the trains on the train network. Theoretically, you could access the web server, put a web shell on there, and then access the line-wide power control system. We couldn't put we considered, can we put a NIDS system here in the power control network while we get this defect fixed in the main control boards, but the switches there that were all legacy, that didn't have span ports or anything like that we could pull data out of. So what we ended up doing is putting a honeypot off the side of the, that was accessible by the main control boards to see, hey, if this was ever exploited, if someone did figure this all out, because these HMI systems were only protected by one of those wooden doors that you see at the train station, which is locked and it says communications on it. And it was just a computer that was in there that was always logged on. The reconnaissance would hopefully hit the honeypot and would identify that someone is potentially looking at the power control system network. This was all so they could get the defect fixed in the main control boards first. So our interim monitoring solution was put in place while the defect remediation happened, so it managed to mitigate the controls for our systems for long enough. I mean, the defect process still took 12 months anyway, but that's pretty good time. And yeah, then there was an upgrade plan for the power control system network to say, hey, it's probably about time that we replace these switches after 15 years. Second case study, looking at a water pumping station. Again, we have one water utility in WA and it's not them. Love you, Water Corp. It's somewhere else. Yeah, white boxes. We have a remote pumping station. So this was somewhere in Australia. It is a remote pumping station for water. Physical security is very minimal there. You've got a barbed fence, and because it is remote, there wasn't good internet service, so you didn't even have CCTV at the time. Can't have a SIEM pulling logs from those systems because the internet link that they had just couldn't have all that data coming through. And also, American companies really don't understand low bandwidth. That's something I've continually come to learn whenever I've deployed a new product. So we couldn't put the link there between the ISCS network and the firewall at the remote pumping station. So what we did is we slapped a small honeypot just on a Raspberry Pi, honestly, in the same rack at the remote pumping station, and this would be the only thing that would send logs, rather than collecting logs from everything else. So really, the risk that we're trying to mitigate is someone comes up to the remote pumping station, goes in through the locked door, which has a key lock, and that's about it. Accesses the systems in there and starts looking around to play with things. So that is that. Now let's have a look at, hang on. Seems like someone's trying to log into our remote pumping station. So we got a suspicious alert detected for that one, about 9 months actually after we put the solution in. Comes through to the SOC, and then you end up calling the cybersecurity engineers, dealing with the OT side, and they're like, we don't know. What's your plans here? We never made that IR plan that you told us to. No CCTV, as I said. They call the maintenance planners. Maintenance planners have nothing on at that site. Cool. Call the local security contractor who, when he isn't doing this, is working at target country. So he heads out there and rolls up in his Hilux, just as, so he heads out and finds our local worker out there. So despite the coordination between our security team and the maintenance planners, it was actually, this guy was out here, he was working for the mothballing team, removing old equipment from the site, and they don't have a communication between them, of course. And so he was trying to make a change to some of their old equipment, getting ready to pull it out, and just basically hit the wrong asset. So what this came out for us, it was a pretty good solution. It was pretty validating to say, hey, look, this kind of worked for what we were trying to do. Someone that we didn't know was going to be out there accessing our systems. And even though this was a false positive, it was still a win for us. It meant that, hey, that IR plan that we said you guys should do, you should probably do that one. And we also found that the asset inventory system that they were working off there was some errors in there. So global use, if you're working for a site with systems all over, white boxes. If you're going to deploy your honeypot environment to the edge, you can gain unique information about potentially who is attacking you. So this is going back to getting information, getting intelligence about your honeypot deployments. And this is great if you have multiple sites all over, because you can start getting an idea of what's unique to different sites. This also works internally, although hopefully you're not getting a lot of reconnaissance internally anyway. When you're deploying to the edge, you're going to get a lot of the noise of the internet. And that's just all the scanners and stuff that happen all the time. There are ways to remove that. I mean, you can manually go through and you can look and you can say who's hitting me all the time. There are other people who develop these scanning lists themselves of, hey, here's the common bad actors. There's one example if you trust QR codes, otherwise there's a link. And excluding mass scanners from your list of data that you're having a look at can really start to reveal is like, hey, what's different here? What's new for me? And that enables you to start getting a global context of saying, what are we seeing at every single site? What are we seeing at only our sites in Australia or only our sites in WA? And what am I seeing only at this specific site itself? And through those stats, you can actually, you can do cool things of saying like, hey, executive, we're getting all these attacks specifically at us, and here's how I can show you that. So you can do this yourself, and this is the how. Where to start, you can decide sort of what honeypot for what solution you want to try and achieve. There are tons out there on GitHub which you can go through, you can explore, you can try and work out which ones you want. Or This is my favorite, which I've started deploying at different sites. You can use this tool by Deutsche Telekom called Teapot. This is an all-in-one honeypot platform. The honeypots are all composed with Docker, so you can choose to what to pull down, what to deploy, where it automatically gets dumped onto an elk stack, which means that you don't really have to worry too much about the connection between trying to drag stuff into your seam and stuff like that. Literally 3 commands and you deploy this and it's set up and running and it's operational. The elk service, as I said, runs on honeypot. It has nginx to provide you a secure way to manage and operate it. You can deploy this internally, you can deploy this externally, it doesn't really matter. So where to start for all of these is all of it. It's just that simple. You get your pretty Norse maps, so your executives know that it's worth spending money on you, as well as graphs to keep managers happy. And because it's a distributed deployment system, you can have it and you can say, hey, for this one site that I'm deploying it to, I can put one honeypot on my BMCS, one on my power network, one on some dev infrastructure that I've got. Or if you're multinational, you can say, well, I'm going to deploy one to a power plant I have in Spain and one I have to a power plant I have in Australia and see what's different between the two. That's sort of what I was doing with the last job, and I was when I first wrote this, I had a practical demo to show that, but maybe now not so much. Live demo question mark. Just give me 1 second. No. It's not showing that screen. Sorry, my live demo question mark is very much a question mark. If you want to check that out, I can show you the deployment that I have set up, but for whatever reason, it's not showing up to the top screen. Key takeaways for this. Honeypots provide you with critical visibility that you might not have elsewhere, or you might not be able to deploy elsewhere. If you have systems where you have low bandwidth, or you can't really touch too much within that network segment, within that zone, then this provides you with an easy monitoring tool where you don't have to go through the arguments of saying, hey, put my agent on your system, please. Or, hey, we need to set up some sort of other syslog collection method. This can all just work, again, with literally 3 commands. Deciding on what honeypots you want to set up in different environments means you can almost customize it to be your site. You can go through all those tools that I showed on GitHub. You can customize the code for yourself, and you can put it with your own branding. So it makes it look like what's expected for your environment. Honeypots, sort of within the active defense role, they detect unusual activity before it reaches critical systems when people are doing those reconnaissance within those zones where people come out where you might not have other controls that you're able to do. You can get valuable data on attacker behavior and use that to update your detection logic sort of live as you're seeing it, or put in security controls ahead of the attacker as you're trying to get them out of the system. Or it gives you time to be able to track down sort of where they're coming from and understand their TTPs. Finally, sort of some couple of key considerations. Choose the honeypot type that's relevant for not just the systems where you're deploying it, but also your team. There's no point putting a couple of high interaction honeypots in different areas if you've got a 2-person cybersecurity team, because you're not going to be able to manage it, and what's the point of putting that one in? Placement is critical to be able to ensure that the honeypots are in the positions where attackers are likely to come through. This is where you're, deploying the honeypot should be off the back of a risk assessment exercise where you're understanding where you have risks that you need to put controls in. Do I have a risk for a lateral movement from a vendor supporter? Do I understand, truly where, am I confident about this guy in Dongara actually having good cybersecurity on his end and managing his identity? And regularly review the honeypot data. It's no point just letting this log because it's not going to be part of your active defense cycle then. It's just a logging tool. Thank you. You can find all my presentations there, and you can find the Teapot tool, which I recommend you check out and deploy yourself at the other QR code. Any questions?
Great talk. You spoke a lot about attacks, sort of looking at them, at the attack coming in through the path. Have you had any experience in actually emulating the end device? So the sensor or the PLC or whatever the case is, and right at the end, emulating it and using it as a honeypot. So if anybody's hitting that, which is not an active device, obviously it's going to trigger
the question there was, have I had luck? I spoke a lot about people coming in and that lateral movement risk. Have I had luck with emulating end device, the PLC systems, that type of stuff? There are honeypots out there which do that. It requires the customization of truly understanding your equipment and be able to present it in such a way. There are tools out there which replicate the Siemens S7 endpoints and things like that, which you can use, and it collects all the commands that would get sent to it and stuff like that. The question would be sort of to think about, for your risk control and where you're putting those controls in. At that point, is that the most appropriate place to put those type of honeypots? Or are there further controls upstream where it would be potentially more appropriate, or you're going to find more information? Those type of putting something at that level, down at level 0 or level 1, where you would see those type of PLCs and things like that, that's where more you're seeing, hey, something's communicating to something which I wouldn't expect, and that instantly triggers, hey, this is something really bad to go check out. You wouldn't really be collecting too much information at that point.
How many deployments of like honeypots are you kind of seeing actually modeling industrial control systems?
That are publicly out there. There's one main system called Conpot, which people tend to use. It's the one that looks at the Siemens systems. But a point to understand about industrial control systems is at that level 3.5, which is what we'd call the industrial control DMZ, level 3 sort of operation control things, they look very similar to IT networks. You don't need a lot of specialized tools to be able to replicate or to be able to present an image of what an industrial control network might look like at those higher levels. I mean, you really don't want anyone progressing lower. You don't really need to dedicate too much time and effort into emulating other behavior. You can make a very convincing top-level overview, which hopefully should catch or deceive most people that you're worried about. Cool. Yep, sorry. Most unusual case study I've had so far. I mean, the two I put in there were some of the, were perhaps the more unusual one. The passenger rail network was certainly interesting to be able to find first that, why is there a web server in an electrical switchboard to start with? And then understanding the full scope of being able to say, okay, this can actually communicate to other parts of the network. That one I'd put at the top. Yep.
You mentioned at the start to insinuate about union professional organisation. Is that running? Is something that linked to, or is that in planning?
That was a question about PA union. No, that's running. I mean, we've been running for what, 30 years?
So what game is that?
Professionals Australia.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Prestigious boost, so it's quite.